I am so pleased to have with me today the Reverend Cynthia Kittredge, the Very Reverend, Cynthia Kittredge, the Dean and President of Seminary of the Southwest. She is a graduate of Harvard Divinity School with both MDiv, THM, and THD, and has been the Dean of Seminary of the Southwest since 2013, is an accomplished author, preacher, and teacher, and an all-around wonderful person. I was privileged to know Dean Kittredge when I was at Seminary of the Southwest, and to be one of her students. So thank you so much, Cynthia, for being here to talk with us about your book, A Lot of the Way the Trees Were Walking.
Neal, it's really, really good to be with you. And I'm very proud of you and really love seeing your work and your congregation. And it's great to be with them today.
Well, thank you so much. It's always nice when your mentors say nice things about you. So this book, a collection of poetry, can you tell us a little bit about what inspired you to write it? What is it about? What sort of prompted you to write poems about the Gospel of Mark?
This book had its origins in a one fall when I was teaching introduction. It was called Interpretation for Preaching, and we read the Gospel of Mark every fall for many, many years, 15 years. And I was thinking about the very first word of the Gospel, which is Hey, RK, the beginning. And every morning I sit quietly and write morning pages, and I was just thinking about that word beginning, and it started writing about it, meditating about it, and it just multiplied and multiplied. And I realized that there was so much generativity in that first word of the gospel. And then the next morning I turned, to the next part of Mark and wrote about that, and just kept going. And it kind of was fed by all the reading I'd done on Mark, all the times I taught it. And it was a fresh encounter that I had with it during that fall when I just reread it and started writing the poems. And I kept on going. I was just going to do them in October. I was going to get through the gospel in October, but it took till January. I never went back and looked at any of them. I just kept going. And then when I looked at the whole group of them, there were about 100, and they ended up falling into these sections. And I had an editor that helped me think about that, and it came together and became this cycle of poems. But it was a very exciting process, and I never thought, there would be a blue book that people would be reading in 2020, but it's been a really wonderful experience.
All right, it's the title of the book is such a brilliant title for a collection of poetry, but it comes from the Gospel of Mark. Can you tell us about how you chose that title? It's and where the passage in Mark.
The passage in Mark is the wonderful healing story in chapter 8. It's a 2-stage healing where Jesus tries once and checks in with the person and says, what do you see? And he says, I see people, but they look like trees walking.
Yes.
Jesus kind of goes back and tunes him up with another with another touching, and then he sees clearly. So it's a in some ways it's a symbolic story about the process of seeing, that you have imperfect sight and then you have clearer sight. But that idea that why does he say that? I see people, but they look like trees walking. It's just a fascinating, mysterious phrase and image. And I mean, I could start over and write a whole book just on trees walking.
It appears in a couple of poems too. You weave it in. And if you think, it's like, this is what the disciples are, their experience. They're in that second stage still, right? Or are they so blind?
Yeah, we're all in that second stage in a way, is we're seeing imperfectly. And even to say, I see people, but they look like trees walking. He knows they're people.
Yeah.
I mean, and what, why do people look like trees walking? Because are trees kind of analogous to people?
Yeah.
I don't know. I even think of that wonderful scene. Is it in Macbeth where the army dresses up like trees?
I don't know.
And then the forest, do they think it's a forest, but it's actually the attacking army?
I mean, I think of the Ents from Lord of the Rings, the tree people.
Yes, yes.
Which is a wonderful sort of image.
The other thing, just to a remark about this, the more I've read this gospel and a lot of scripture, it's kind of built around these archetypal elements like trees and walking. Like walking is a theme throughout the gospel, and trees are a major element of phenomenon of the universe, and obviously very important in Christian scripture and other mythology. And so working on this, thinking about these poems and thinking about really getting into the reality of what walking is. You just focus in on that, and it's very alive, and it kind of resonates outward. And when people start thinking about something like walking in terms of scripture, it I don't know, it engages people, invites them to think about it.
You do that. I mean, you find these throughout these poems, images, lines that I guess struck you in reading it, and I found myself going, "Oh my gosh, like, yeah, that is strange." And so one of them from Mark chapter 10, and it's another one of the healing stories in the Gospel of Mark, and it's Bartimaeus, son of Timaeus, in Jericho, and he cries out to Jesus. They tell him to quiet down, but Jesus says, "Come here," and he comes. And there's this detail that you highlight in these two poems, that he takes off his cloak to go to Jesus. Do you mind reading Road on page 41 in your?
Yes, I'll do that. And let me say that, the word for cloak in the Bartimaeus story is hemation, which is also translated garment. And it's the same word that is used to describe Jesus' clothing in the story of the bleeding woman. So unless I touch the hem of his clothing. So hemation actually links those stories, but you don't think of them because you think of cloak in one and whatever it is, clothing in the other.
Yeah.
And so those stories are linked. So I'm playing with the relationship between Bartimaeus and the bleeding woman.
Find reading either Road or Garment. Well, let's do Garment because you brought it up.
Well, sure. And by the way, one of the things I teach is that Mark was probably experienced orally, performed orally. And so these echoes between hemation in one story and hemation in another story would be heard, and they would resonate. People weren't studying the text, like we do as biblical scholars. They were hearing it. So that's my argument why this is relevant to the meaning. Garment. His sister was the bleeding one who sought him in the mob, ducked among the maimed and lame, outskirted the 12 with names to snatch the power from the cloak he wore. He shouted for mercy so loudly he was finally heard. "You've got a chance," they said. "Seize it and get up." He dropped his wrap, for he was asked a question to be answered naked.
I love that you make a relationship between the two of them, sister.
Hmm.
The, and one of the things you do throughout is play with relationships between these characters. Uh, the boy, the demoniac boy, you write as a girl
Hmm.
who I love the who laces her Oxfords carefully, her Oxford shoes every morning. Yet by night she has the spirit seize her.
Oh, Neal, I love hearing your responses to these poems. It's
Well,
such great.
well, I love that one. It's such an incredible image. But this one that it's a sister, and they're both snatching, right?
Yes.
They're grabbing, they're seizing Jesus.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's one of uh, the boldness. I think I emphasize this introduction, this idea of bold courage,
Mhm,
uh, and the the bold courage which is inspired in desperate people.
mhm,
Because both these characters are desperate. The woman who's been bleeding for 12 years, the blind beggar at the side of the road. Their need for Jesus and for healing is so huge, that this um, she snatched the
mhm.
power, and then they're just interesting. If you read those stories side by side, you'll see a lot of really interesting relationships.
Well, the willingness to break social codes. She grabs a man, a strange man, and she has this condition makes her unclean, and she does that, and he takes off his cloak, like drops his cloak. Right? We're not imagining, at least how you presented it. You're not imagining he's taking off his suit jacket.
Right.
He
Right.
still has his tie and vest, his shirt, tie, and vest. But no, he's like David, naked before the Lord.
Well, and I'm making a leap, obviously, there. But I'm also making a foreshadowing the young man who runs away naked at the time of the
Right.
passion, which is something people love to think about and speculate about, and who is that and all that. Um, but this idea of clothing and nakedness, and what, um, the power of clothes,
Mm-hmm.
power of nakedness. Some people also see the Gospel of Mark as a baptismal text, and baptism has this image of, um, becoming naked and reclothing oneself.
Mm-hmm.
So all those are kind of evoked, um, or being evoked. And you don't have to solve it. You can just read this poem and, um, just get into it. Like he dropped his rap. Like rap is such a great word. And
It is.
dropping your rap is so great.
It's
So
almost
just the
provocative.
sounds, you just use the sounds to
Yes. Well, it makes the text come alive in a way. In reading the collection of poetry, I found myself paying attention. I said this already, to details that I've missed. And you write a lot of the poems from different perspectives, the characters in the Gospel of Mark, that allow you to inhabit the gospel in a new way. Another one, in a perhaps disturbing way, is the one where you use the voice of Herod.
oh yes.
Um, Herod says, it's
Herod is the Herod is the bad guy, the film noir bad guy.
it is, yes, and he talks about how why won't they all stay dead? John's dead. Is he back again? Why can't these my enemies stay dead? But I, the playing with voices is interesting. Why did what inspired the certain voice
Yeah,
decisions that you made?
thank you. Well, one of the things I've thought about in terms of studying scripture in the Gospel of Mark is that the Gospel of Mark, the narrator has so much power and
Mhm,
focuses your attention on certain things, and the reader really sees the gospel the way the narrator wants you to see it.
mhm,
And sometimes it's in a poem you can fight that, and you can say, I'm going to disobey this narrator and I'm going to go identify with another character.
Mhm.
And that's important. Why is it important? It's just a fun thing to do, and it opens up the story, and it also resists some of the way the story the disciples are the heroes in the story, and the other characters are minor characters.
Mhm.
The women are portrayed as minor or secondary or whatever. But when you resist that, the way the authors, the narrator's telling it, you can find new things. So that's the reason I enjoyed putting myself in the. I also put myself in the voice of the puppies under the table in one of
The
the
Syrophoenician
poems.
woman, right?
Yeah,
Lapping up, eating greedily.
under the table, and
This is the story, if you remember, in the Gospel of Mark, just where it's one of the more troubling passages. The woman comes to Jesus. Her daughter has a demon, and she asks for healing for her daughter, and she's not the house of Israel. And so he says, look, you feed the children first. And she says, well, even the dogs eat the food under the master's table. And he's like, okay, your daughter's healed.
yeah. Can I read that one, Neal?
Yes, I would love that.
That's Feast of Crumbs. That's one of, you asked me my favorite ones. That's one of my favorite ones. Feast of Crumbs. The whole litter convened beneath the feast, scrambled, tumbled, warm fur shining. Not since they were weaned have they been filled, let in from the raw backyard, spilled bread, red as meat, take and eat, then sleep the sleep of the healed.
Obvious Eucharistic,
Yes.
take and eat. And you're doing something where we're imagining ourselves as the puppy, right?
Yes. Yes.
I'm not on Team Jesus of the house of Israel, or even this woman. I'm one of the pups under the table.
Well, and that feeling of being, the physical experience of being out in the cold and then being let in and fed and going from hunger to satisfaction and being with your companions, your siblings, your kin, and sleeping next to them. So it's very, very sensual. And I'd like to, for people of faith, I'd like them to think about, that's what salvation feels like, or communion feels like. It feels like let in from the raw backyard to sleep in peace with those you love. So that's just sensuality is sort of part of the strategy of this poem anyway.
It's also the sort of exuberance of the dog.
Yes.
That no, like
yeah.
it's sort of dogs have no shame when it comes to just running in and eating the food. There's something. It's again like the woman and the blind man, right? Grabbing, seizing, not being passive in the face of the Lord, but grabbing him.
I also think that one of the things that I enjoy about these poems is they're supposed to be funny in a way.
Yes.
And so the idea of the litter convening, convening is such a pompous word, and we talk about convening a meeting or convening a congregation, and so this idea of the litter convening is supposed to be funny. So
it is. I noticed, so you sort of answered this, you don't really have poems from Jesus's perspective. Was that
yes,
humility on your part, or
well, I don't think I didn't use the word Jesus except in one poem which I had written before. Actually, it was in one poem I incorporated that I'd written before about the breaking through the roof of the house.
Yeah.
But other than that, I didn't use Jesus, the word
Ah,
Jesus, or God. I don't think I used God either.
no.
Um, I just wanted to look at the gospel without the language of traditional piety.
Mhm.
Also, the gospel is Jesus focused,
Yes.
and Jesus identity, Jesus power. So I wanted to put the emphasis on some of the more human characters in it. Um, so that was my thinking there.
Yeah. I often find that Milton's Paradise Lost would have been a lot better if God had spoken less.
Right.
It's hard to relate. Gospels do a good enough job. Let's just let them speak for the Lord and for God, and we'll keep quiet. Um, you sort of, by doing that, by looking at these peripheral characters, there's a way of discipleship that is, again, different than what you first think when you read the gospel. It's different than how I preach. I'm inspired to preach differently because I often focus on the disciples, right? They are the heroes of the story. What does discipleship look like? It looks like what Jesus says to the disciples, and what the disciples do. But you have all of these other characters who are disciples. They are followers of Jesus. They're there in the text. They're there all along. Would you mind reading? This is one of my favorites. The poem "How" on page 65. It sort of highlights this other way of discipleship that you're bringing to the front.
And when I teach Mark and we analyze it, I do argue that the disciples and these other characters you're meant to see them together and in comparison. And the irony that the inner circle seem to bumble and the desperate people on the outside get it and are exemplars of faith, partly through their desperation. Yeah, this is about, it's in the section called Break. So it's the beginning of the Passion narrative. And I'm bringing back the characters who've been in the rest of the gospel in order to see them as characters who have already exemplified self-emptying, self-giving, self-sacrifice, and the way of the cross. How? If you want to follow, you have to risk humiliation, embarrassment, failure. You have to be prepared to lose everything and then lose it. The widow gave her coins, the anointer her perfume, every last bit of both. You have to chase like the bleeder, yell like the beggar. You have to stay alive when you want to sleep. You have to stay awake when you want to die. They show you how.
You have to chase like the bleeder, yell like the beggar. Great lines.
I like that. I'm an Episcopalian and I'm a very polite person, and there's a lot of coincidence between my temperament and the temperament of the Book of Common Prayer.
It happens for all of us, right?
Yeah. So the celebration of yelling and chasing and being bold and courageous and even rude is very attractive to me, and it speaks to me, and there's also a gendered element to it. Right. In our culture, women are taught to be polite and gentle and modulated, and yet this gospel is saying you go for it. Risk, chase, yell, call for help. And to me that touches the part of myself which is desperate
Mm-hmm.
and not polite and really needs Christ.
We look like we've got it put together,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes our faith can simply replicate this falsehood about how put together we are,
Right.
and these people aren't.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, the Syrophoenician woman, argues with Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
It's yeah, and that's what being a disciple is being this type of desperate person.
And it's not an accident that the real desperate people in the gospel are, some of them are women.
Mm-hmm.
And the other desperate people in the gospel are parents who are advocating for their children, both mothers and fathers.
Which another one of my favorites, because I am a father, is a poem on fathers.
Yes.
Can I just read the opening line? Because
yes. Yeah, you read it, Neal. Yeah.
It's fathers. It's in the section called "Die," which you could probably guess what it's about, the crucifixion. But not all fathers are disappointing or divine or absent. Simon, for instance, whose sons Alexander and Rufus are part of his name, undetachable. Zebedee, remember, was patient when he was stranded by James and John. Jairus pleaded for his daughter to be made well and live, the girl who bore his name. The nameless father of the nameless boy watched the demon seize him, throw him to the ground, cast him into the water and into the fire, over and over again, cried out in prayer, I have faith, help my faithlessness. They did not abandon, they did not forsake. That opening line is a Father's Day card. Not all fathers are disappointing or divine or absent.
Neal, I loved hearing you read that. That was so beautiful.
Thank you.
So beautiful.
It's the human, that these are people and the parents. And the gospel so often it's easy to feel like Jesus is always hard on family structures and critical, and he is, obviously. But yet they're there and they're being affirmed at the same time.
Well, and that's one of the themes I was following in these poems is, some of the scholarship says that Mark is an anti-family gospel, and it critiques the biological family and replaces it with the community of those who do the will of God. Mm-hmm. Chapter 3.
Yes.
And that's true. But these poems focus attention on those human relationships of father and son, father and daughter, mother and daughter, that are, I would say, they're restored. And, well, I mean, in my reading, the resurrection is restoring those relationships, not dissolving them, and it's this love of the father for his son, and that's so powerful.
Jessica Martin, who we had on last week, in her book Holiness and Desire, has a whole section on holiness is going home. That for as often as Jesus tells disciples to leave, he also tells all these other people to go home. And your poems sort of show this, what is going home, being restored with family. It makes the gospel in a way more relatable, probably for most of us who aren't going to leave our families but still have to deal with them.
Yeah, it recognizes the brokenness of families, but this is from Luke, but the story when the widow of Nain, his son is dead and he's on the edge of town, and Jesus comes, and the line there is, Jesus restored him to his mother.
Yeah.
And that also, of course, evokes the King's passage where the northern prophets is resurrecting raising the child. And it's this restoration of family theme
One other poem I would love for us to talk about is the poem Don't. And you mentioned it was one of your favorites. I'd love to hear why. I'd love for you to read it if you don't mind, but maybe you should read it first and then tell me why it's one of your favorites. It was definitely my favorite from the collection too.
Um, well, the book of poems grapples with this idea of the gospel as an apocalyptic gospel,
Mhm.
and what apocalypse means. Does it mean destruction of the world? Does it mean revelation? Does it mean resurrection, or a combination of all those things? Um, and there's that very strange and mysterious chapter, that speech of Jesus in Mark 13, the little apocalypse, sometimes it's called, and he's arguing or telling the disciples not to jump to conclusions about um, the end, signs of the end. So this poem is playing on the idea of disaster, signs of the end. It refers to events that happened in my lifetime and yours, and and well, we'll just see what happens. What do you think? It's called Don't. If you stay awake through all the tribulations, your own troubles, the turmoil of your people and of all the nations, then you will learn, as from the fig tree and all the other parables, that there isn't going to be any one definitive sign. You might think it will be the destruction of East Asian islands, so many dead fishermen, and the disgorging of sea monsters that no one has ever seen. Or the drowning of New Orleans, its music and cuisine. How many Black people washed up, and how poor, how old, hooked up to IVs and ventilators, all yanked out by the water, stranded on roofs, rotted, everything shooting, stealing, scrambling to escape. You might mistake for the last day the down thundering towers, the atomized paper and flesh, concrete transfigured into a cloud that darkened the sun, descended and silenced the islands, the mainland, the mighty, and the humble. Or for the terminal, the federal building exploded and leveled out on the plains under the wide sky. There's a new park now. These are not final. They will preach that you and your fathers have sinned. They will create out of the dust new adversaries to oppose and to hate with hottest hate. Do not go after them. The earth cracks open and people fall within the smashing rocks. The seas burst their bounds and wash the cities away. Huge oaks will be afflicted with blight. Great trees will fall by themselves and crush what is underneath. You will suffer as humans do, your child quaking, seizing, your husband gone mad, breaking rocks, your mother burning up. Your own hand will wither and your eyesight fade to black. No corporate cataclysm will stop life being full of losing. Endure on tenterhooks. Hold the nursing child with the hand you have left. Scent in the damp darkness the seed in the soil, clinging to the scattered stones. During the wakeful night, hear the sound of it sprouting.
That's scent in the damp darkness, the seed in the soil. Those puppies are back again. I immediately thought of a dog sniffing
Mm-hmm.
for something buried in the ground. You bring all these different images of, uh, the two towers, Katrina, the tsunami. in the Gospel of Mark has all these other images of the same sorts of things that would have been for them. And it makes this passage in Mark that is otherwise feels so distant, like a thing written from the past that speaks no word, makes it speak a word today about the fear and the violence. And it's hard not to think you would have some more things to add in 20.
Yeah. I could update it.
You could add a few more disasters if you would like.
Well, and I think it's you can get caught up in the disasters.
Yes.
And you can, these disasters have been used to create new adversaries.
Mm-hmm.
But you can also realize that human life in itself is a losing. And I do think that what Jesus is saying in that sermon in Mark 13 is, look at the fig leaves.
Mm-hmm.
See the sign of the kingdom's coming near.
Right.
And the affirmation of the Gospel of Mark is this: these human family relationships,
mm-hmm.
the beauty of the seed in the soil,
mm-hmm.
and yet the beauty is right next to mental illness and fever and
blindness.
Yeah. I was rereading this poem this morning in preparation for talking with you, and I thought, isn't it interesting that the disaster we're experiencing now is so quiet, and it doesn't have the special effects of a nice big explosion or a bomb or a crash. It's this slow, silent,
mm-hmm.
deadly, death-bringing
mm-hmm.
disaster that's unfolding around us so quietly, and without some of the normal signs of a disaster like the World Trade Center or Katrina. And I don't know what to do with that, but it just made me think, yeah, this is one of those times that we could interpret
mm-hmm.
as God's punishment or as the work of an adversary, or but I think we're called to do this, to scent in the soil the sign of the seed sprouting, or to look to the members of our family, and to nature, and to kind of God's overarching plan of restoration.
This past spring was one of the most beautiful
mm-hmm.
we've ever had, and this poem reminded me, in the gospel it talks about the fig leaf, and this is happening at the same time as the disaster.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's not, and the hope for the kingdom of God isn't escaping the life being full of losing.
Yeah,
like it's just that's the facts.
Mm-hmm.
But in the midst of that, and we have some agency too. It's not simply we have to. A lot of times with these disasters, it feels like just happening to us, but we consent,
mm-hmm.
we can hear, we can cling, we can grasp, we can yell, as all these poems do.
Yes. And the line, hold the nursing child with the hand you have left.
That's
that's
so great, Cynthia.
There's a famous man with a withered hand, and
yeah.
I just love to think of either the father with one arm holding the nursing child, or the mother with one arm. Sort of, we're maimed. We're all maimed, mm-hmm. and yet we are able to live with beauty.
Mm-hmm. You play with all these parables, the seed in the soil clinging to the scattered stones. The seed that hits the stones is the seed that dies.
Yeah.
You're sort of saying that there's seed in the soil, there's soil even where there's stones.
Right. They're even surviving in the rocky soil where they're supposed to wither. You're
sort of expanding Jesus's parable using what he says in Mark, using other images.
There's another archetypal image is the stones.
Yes.
That's just a basic, wonderful symbol, image, element of life that runs through all the poems.
And there's a park now.
Yeah, that's
a new park now.
Oklahoma City. Yeah.
Yes, but there's hope that there's human creating good things.
Yes.
In the midst of all these things.
Yeah, and the park in Oklahoma City is a resurrection. It's a human act of resurrection.
Mm-hmm. Cynthia, thank you so much for talking with us. I encourage all of you to read this book. It will make the Gospel of Mark come alive, and it's just a lot of fun, and the poems are really good. There's so many in here we didn't get to talk about, but I encourage it to you. One last question. What are you doing during COVID-19 to stay sane?
Well, one thing you'll like, Neal, I've been going to Barton Springs Pool early in the morning. The day it opened, it's been closed for months. It opened about 2 weeks ago, and I've been going there at 5:30 or 6 and having a communion with nature in a public place with other people, which is quite extraordinary.
The spiritual heart of Texas.
Yes.
Is in Barton Springs.
Yeah, Neal had a ritual of making a pilgrimage there. The other thing I've been doing is making art. I've been doing some drawing and painting and a little bit of writing, but mostly making objects and things like that.
Well, good. Sounds like you're not just sitting and watching television like so many.
No, I don't have a big television practice.
Good for you. It's mostly grim stuff on there.
Neal, you're a great reader and a wonderful companion to engage with in being a disciple and reading this book and talking about it. And I just can't thank you enough for the questions and this conversation and for the ministry you're doing. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Cynthia. I appreciate it. We will have you in person at St. Albans. We would love that when that happens again.
I'd love that too.
Thanks.
Thank you, Neal. Take care. Bye-bye.